everybody. How are you guys today? Good? All right, so yes, you were correct. I was on KITV4 this morning talking about fishing line. I definitely was wearing the exact same thing. I definitely have been traveling a lot in the past 2 days, and I've been up since 4. I discovered I do not want to be a newscaster. I think they wake up at like 1:30 in the morning. It's crazy. They have crazy hours. So tonight what we're going to do is kind of, and actually I guess the program we're doing with monofilament line and trying to recycle fishing line goes really well with just talking about conservation issues on the ocean in general. And just to give you guys a quick background, my name is Lauren Campbell, and I'm the conservation manager here at Pacific Whale Foundation. So I organize all these Making Waves, and tonight we have a really special guest. Her name is Sarah Courbis, and I don't know if you guys heard, probably the ones who just came in. Sarah's actually in the Virgin Islands, and I asked her to do this talk, I guess about maybe 2 months ago during the summertime. I always try to have talks that are related to what we're seeing out in the ocean right now, and spinner dolphins and our dolphin watches are really popular right now. And she said she would, she's like, but I'm not going to be in the islands anymore. And she just switched jobs, and then she's like, I'm actually going to be, I thought she was in Florida. So it is midnight right now in the Virgin Islands. This woman is extremely dedicated. So it should show you how passionate she is about dolphins. I'm going to give you a really quick bio, and then we'll get started from there. So it is a webinar. Again, if you didn't get that, I'm not going to like teleport her here. She's not here, but her voice is going to be with us. Sarah received her doctorate in biology from Portland State University, and she also has her PhD. And for her PhD research, she was studying population genetics of pantropical spotted dolphins here in the Hawaiian Islands. And she found that in this research, there were separate genetic populations of dolphins that were near the inhabited islands, which before that they weren't really exactly sure the population dynamics fully. For her master's research at San Francisco State University, she studied the effects of swimmers and vessels on the behavior of spinner dolphins near the Hawaiian Islands. And for the past 2 years, she has worked at the Hawaiian Islands Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary as the operations coordinator for Department of Land and Natural Resources. Phew. But recently, I guess it was about a month ago, she did transition, and she is now back at Portland State University working as a research associate, and she's continuing to conduct research on Hawaii's marine mammals. And I showed everybody, a couple of people, there was a news story this morning as well on dolphins and the impact of swim with programs, particularly on Oahu, and talking about some of the Dolphin Smart regulations and the Dolphin Smart program. And we have one of our naturalists, Chris, is sitting right back here in this pink top, and Chris can attest to the same fact. When we go out on our vessels and our tours, it's definitely following a very high standard of giving dolphins their space and trying to find that balance between what is education and then what is the harassment. And that is something that's difficult, but the Dolphin Smart that you listen to, I'm actually working with NOAA right now to get us on board with that program and to be certified under that program. So a little bit of background, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sarah. Sarah, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay. I'm going to get you started.
All right. Let me know if you're having any trouble hearing me. Are we okay?
Are you guys good? Lights? Yes. Get our lights. All right, Sarah, you're good to go.
Awesome. Okay. So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk with you, even though I couldn't be there in person. I'm really excited to be able to share some information about odontocete, the toothed whales. You guys probably hear a lot about humpback whales out there, and of course with the Pacific Whale Foundation, or the Pacific, I'm trying to remember which year.
Yeah, you're right.
I remember what I'm doing this talk for. It's late. It's like midnight out here. So, in any case, the people who are hosting your talk do a lot of whale watching, as well as some dolphin stuff. So I'm pleased to be able to thank some people who helped me with this project, who you can see their names here on this first slide. And I just wanted to point out that the photos are, I didn't go out of my way to put a whole bunch of copyright information on them, but most of the photos are courtesy of Cascadia Research Collective and our copyrighted pictures, so I can't I need to make sure that everybody knows that those are not my pictures. So I just want to start out with a little bit of an overview about baleen whales versus toothed whales. So as many of you know, there's humpback whales, of course, in the Hawaiian Islands, but there's actually a number of other baleen whale species that are found in the Hawaiian Islands, exclusive economic zone, although not usually as close to the islands as humpback whales. So we actually do have minke whales, bay whales, blue whales, Buddhist whales, fin whales, and right whales that have been seen near the Hawaiian Islands. There's a couple of pictures of some of those at the top of the screen there. The difference between baleen whales and toothed whales, of course, given the name, baleen whales don't have teeth and toothed whales do. The baleen whales have baleen plates instead of teeth. They have two blowholes. They don't engage in echolocation. They're typically much larger than the toothed whales, although the sperm whales have an exception to that. And they feed lower on the food chain. They're not really apex predators. Often they feed on plankton or small fish. They also tend to be seasonally migratory. So humpback whales, as you know, are mainly found in the Hawaiian Islands during the breeding season. The toothed whales, or the odontocete, actually have one blowhole, and you can see up in the top corner there on the left picture here that shows the difference. And of course, here you see the baleen and the baleen whales and the teeth in toothed whales. And the toothed whales use echolocation, much like bats use to help them find prey and navigate. They tend to be smaller, they have different prey preferences, and they are year-round residents in Hawaii, which is an interesting thing about the odontocete. So any time of year, you could go out and find odontocetes around the Hawaiian Islands, and they often are found in large groups, and many of these species, it turns out, are actually island-associated, and I'll talk more a little bit about that research as we go along. You may be surprised to know that there are 18 species of odontocetes that have documented around the Hawaiian Islands. Many of these are dolphins, which are listed here, and these pictures all are in order, basically, from the left side down and then the right side down of these different species. And I have some information to speak about the ones that are italicized here. And then there's also species that are not dolphins. We actually have 3 documented species of beach whales, the sperm whale, and then the dorsal pygmy sperm whales also live off the coast. They tend to be a little more cryptic, but actually, off the island of Hawaii, we see the dorsal pygmy sperm whales reasonably often. Why do we care about these animals? Well, they're important apex predators in the ecosystems in which they live, and Hawaii included. Often these are keystone animals that affect the balance within that ecosystem. They also interact with fisheries and are popular for tourism, which are both economic interests that make them important from that perspective. But more than that, of course, they're interesting animals that lots of people care about and want to see. Also, the fact that they have fairly slow reproduction, relatively, means that there's a higher risk of human activity affecting those populations. So just to start off here a little bit, some fun facts about odontocete. I have a few questions here, which usually I have people raise hands, so I don't know if you want to shout out what you think, but do old toothed whales have teeth?
Shout out.
No, well, not really. So the sperm whale has teeth only in the bottom jaw. Female beach whales have no teeth, and the males only have 2 teeth. And I took some pictures here so you can see. Here's the sperm whale with the bottom teeth here. And here are these teeth at the top. It looks like something poking out of their heads like horns. That's actually the teeth on this beach whale here. And then the one on the right, it doesn't occur in Hawaii, so I just find it really interesting. It's a beach whale that's called strap-toothed whale, and the teeth actually grow around the mouth so that they can only open its mouth about 10 centimeters. So they still eat, live, do their thing, but they can barely open their mouth because of the teeth.
Huh.
Does anybody have any ideas why spinner dolphins might spin?
Any ideas?
Because it's
Don't be
fun.
shy. Some thoughts about? It's easier when I can call on people, but you've probably heard before that some reason they may spin is to remove parasites, or potentially to communicate with other dolphins. The bubble cloud that they create as they hit the water is actually a fairly unique signature under the water, and echolocating dolphins would be able to discern that as different from other activities. Which whales dive deepest and longest?
Any guesses? Which whale dives deepest and
Not sure what
longest?
someone said there, but but actually, the sperm whales and beach whales can both dive over a mile down and spend more than an hour underwater. And I'm going to show you some dive profiles of beach whales so you can kind of see what that looks like and we go further along in the talk. So just to throw a few things up here for thought, I pulled these conservation issues associated with the toothed whales in Hawaii from Cascadia Research Lodge's website. And these are just some of the issues that face dolphins off of our coast and other odontocete. So to talk a little bit more about research, as Lauren mentioned, I did my master's research on spinner dolphins on the island of Hawaii and looked into the, I'm sorry, yes?
Hold on, you're about one slide back. So we're on conservation issues. We just got on conservation issues.
Okay, sorry, there must be the delay. Let me know when you got to the,
So these are the conservation issues. Just talking about,
okay.
you can see that there's a number, especially with the vessels again, as well as fishery interactions. Okay, we're good.
Okay, sorry about that. I gotta remember that I gotta try and hit the forward before I'm done talking about the particular slide. So this slide shows some of the research that I worked on when I did my master's study on spinner dolphins. And this is just a couple of figures out of that research. So I looked at Keauakekua, Hononau, and Kahako Bay. Kahako is actually by Ho'okena, most people know by that name. And the top graph here shows the mean vessels and swimmers per scan sample that I did over the course of each hour of the day. And you can kind of see how there's these sort of peaks in the number of vessels and swimmers that you find in the midday. In the past, the way spinner dolphin behavior generally occurred is that dolphins would come in and be fairly active in the morning when they came into bays, and then they would be quiet in the afternoon when they rest, and then in the later afternoon they would be more active again and sort of go out to sea. And what I found was that there wasn't really, in this bottom chart here, you can see the behaviors per hour, and I actually found that there wasn't a significant difference in the number of behaviors per hour for dolphins in any of these days, although there's a little bit of a peak for Ho'okena in the middle of the day, which is the opposite of what you would expect to see. And I think this is actually due to two things. One, the amount of behavior that they engaged in early and later in the day was really low. In the past, you could see extremely Keauakekua animals leaping into the bay early in the morning, and you could see them for a mile or more out. I actually never observed that in the time that I did my research, which is actually in 2002, so more recently. I'm not sure how this is falling out, and there's actually current research going on this issue as well. But so the behavior was depressed a bit on the early and late portions of the day, and increased a bit from historical levels in the middle of the day. So basically, animals are not resting in the middle of the day in the way that they used to, and they're also not engaging a lot of behavior beginning the end of the day, which could potentially be related to not attracting attention because, people see dolphins jumping and then they're attracted to them and come out and are interacting with them. So these changes in behavior over time are indicative of potential issues associated with increased vessel and swimmer traffic in these particular bays. And the interesting thing about Kahako Bay is that actually, even though there was a lot less vessel traffic in that bay, which you can see in the upper chart, it's fairly low, most of that activity was directed at dolphins. So even though there wasn't a lot of people in the bay there, most of them were chasing dolphins, and so you can see that the behavior levels of the dolphins were much higher in that bay. So just the amount of traffic alone isn't the most important thing when considering how much disturbance there may be or harassment may be occurring with respect to spinner dolphins. And sometimes people argue, well, dolphins make the decision, they can leave the bay, or they come up to me, or they come up to my boat. And I think of that as sort of, animals do make choices, and they may make choices to interact with people or approach boats, but unfortunately, this can still be a negative thing for the animal because this can cause them to have problems like not getting enough rest in this case. There have been studies in Australia that have shown that animals, all the dolphins in particular, that are regularly approached by people, and particularly those that are provisioned, that are fed by people, actually have twice the calf mortality of animals that are not. And they think this is because those animals are distracted from keeping an eye on their calves, and their calves have a much higher shark mortality rate. So even though an animal may choose to interact with you, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's good for the animal. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind in terms of how you choose to interact with spinner dolphins. So knowing that wildlife is impacted by harassment like this, when I was working with DLNR, we went ahead and did a study to look at how we could develop some public service announcements that would help us to sort of deliver this message of keeping your distance from Hawaii's wildlife, spinner dolphins included. And we looked at the fact that in Hawaii we have about 7 million annual visitors that come from out of state. And about 80% of those visitors engage in some kind of marine recreation. So we decided that this was an important target audience for us to think about reaching in terms of how they interact with the wildlife in Hawaii. We also know that this level of traffic and these kinds of approaches, and there are other studies in addition to the one that I did, that show that there are problems associated with approaching wild animals. And we know that sometimes it causes long-term harm. Like I mentioned, the calf mortality rate in baldness dolphins in Australia. There are other studies that show similar types of results. And hopefully you can see this slide now that says wildlife is impacted by harassment. In the bottom right corner, there's a picture of people swimming in Honaunau Bay, and you can see the dolphins there. People get very, very close to the animals in that location. So to move forward with this project, we got a grant from the Hawaii Tourism Authority to create some PSAs based on some research that we did in collaboration with the University of Hawaii, where we attempted to identify some of the barriers to proper wildlife viewing behavior in order to increase the effectiveness of the public service announcement that we were going to put together. So in order to do this, we surveyed U.S. residents who planned to or had visited Hawaii recently, and we used an online survey method, which is somewhat unusual. This is kind of a newer way to approach this. Usually people do these sort of beach intercepts where you go up to someone on the beach and ask them a bunch of questions. And to some degree, that's a good way to do surveys, but it also makes it harder to get people to spend the time. They're busy vacationing. They don't want to necessarily talk to you. And you also don't necessarily get always as representative a sample as you'd like of people coming from out of town. So we did this survey in September of 2012, and ultimately we had 241 participants, so it was a pretty good sample size for this kind of work. So I wanted to go over with you a few of the interesting findings that we had from this study. One really interesting result was that we found that visitors valued protecting marine wildlife, but they didn't do so at the expense of other amenities, basically. So, for example, one of the questions that, hopefully the slide is coming up that says this, that it was about thinking about the qualities of hotel staff that are important to you. Although knowledge of the natural environment and culture were important, friendliness, knowing where restaurants were, things like that were perhaps more important. And that may be sort of satisfying a hierarchy of needs where first people want to feel like they're comfortable and know the way around, and then they can worry about what's going on in the environment. We also were surprised to find that visitors were largely unaware of laws that govern wildlife viewing, and the type of initiatives like Lauren mentioned, the Dolphin Smart and things like that, that are working to recognize programs that are eco-friendly, people really weren't that familiar with those. So when we asked them, for example, some questions about that, as you can see in this slide, there were actually 81% of people were unaware of environmental certifications and recognition programs in Hawaii, which is an unfortunate number. Also, there were people who, when we asked how do you think interacting with humans affects marine wildlife, there were 32% were unsure and 60% thought it was positive. So it was kind of an even split between negative and not negative. I think one of the most interesting things, dog's barking behind me. I apologize. One of the most interesting things that we found was that the people who were most likely to harass wildlife based on our questions were also most likely to be interested in environmental issues and engage in pro-environmental behavior otherwise. So essentially, without going into a lot of statistical analysis, there were two factors that sort of came out of the analysis we did. One was there were people who tended to score high on questions associated with proximity and interactions with animals. And the other set was scoring high on questions about environmental issues, but there was more overlap between those two types of people. So essentially, there is a significant correlation between these two factors. So if you tended to want to be close to animals, you also tended to care about environmental issues and want to conserve and protect wildlife. These also correlated with pro-environmental behaviors like using sustainable seafood or picking up litter at the beach or recycling, things of that nature. Similarly, we also found that visitors most likely to harass wildlife were most interested in engaging in wildlife-related activities, which means that they, to some degree, drive the market. So the people who scored high on harassment factors were more likely to want to go out and view, swim with, interact with wild animals. So these are the people who are driving what the tour operators are doing to some degree. One of the most surprising things that we found in this survey was that people trusted third-party sources like guidebook authors considerably more than they would trust people who lived in Hawaii, which if you can see this chart here, 73% of people extremely trusted guidebook authors with respect to information about Hawaii's wildlife, and only 1% with extremely trusted Hawaii residents. So this tells us something about approach. Now, we put together a public service announcement, but first of all, it tells us having a Hawaii resident as the medium for speaking isn't necessarily going to be the best one. It also tells us we probably need to start talking with guidebook authors about incorporating more information about wildlife viewing into what they're writing because people trust them. Another thing that we found was that people who were more likely to harass animals actually liked all of the different approaches that we put forward. We put out images and taglines for people to consider and kind of rate. And we were really looking at different approaches to reaching people, like empathy or sympathy or social norms, like everybody's doing it, or responsibility, save this for the future. Basically, people who ranked high on harassment factor also ranked high on liking all of these. So what that really told us was they probably liked the images with the animals, and that was a positive interaction for them. So it wasn't necessarily as important which approach we used, but that we had something that was interesting with animals in it. So given all of these positive ratings for the approaches that we could choose, we ultimately decided to go with a sympathy approach and an empathy approach. So we also were capitalizing on the fact that people who tend to craft animals want to see pictures of animals. We used some humor, which is known to be an effective tool in public service announcements. And we also made sure to add some information about recognition programs that you can choose an operator in order to address the lack of knowledge that people had about those programs. So at this point, I did give Lauren, there's 3 30-second PSAs that we made, and we don't necessarily have to watch all 3 of them, but if she wouldn't mind playing one of those so you can see, I think maybe the turtle one is probably a good example so you can see kind of what we put together.
Okay, hold on just a second. Christy, can you talk to her? Tell her to hold on.
She's pulling it up.
Okay.
The first one or the turtle one?
Yeah, wait, isn't that? Yeah, just look at the dragon.
If you don't like it, what makes you think leaving? Please keep your distance and
me tell her.
Okay, it's done.
All right. So it gives you a feel for what we put together, and we've shared these with a number of NGOs and other organizations, and are going to work further on distribution. And we've been presenting this research that we had at the Hawaii Conservation Conference. So basically, I mean, I guess the take-home message to me is that people who like animals want to be close to animals, and that's not a real big surprise. But trying to get the message to people that it's great that you like animals, but you need to give animals a little bit of space and a little bit of distance so that you're not interfering with their ability to function and decreasing their fitness is a difficult message, and it's hard for people because they have the best of intentions. So we really have to work hard to spread that message, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to give this talk, even though I'm in St. Thomas, is because that's an important message I think that needs to be shared as much as possible across as many audiences as possible. So to move on to a new topic, we also have been working on odontocete population research in the Hawaiian Islands, and this was more the focus of my PhD work that Lauren mentioned. So at the moment, many of the stocks of odontocetes that live around the Hawaiian Islands, ones that you might see if you went out on the boat, are managed as if they are one single breeding population across the entire Hawaiian Islands, like within the entire exclusive economic zone out to 200 miles offshore of the Hawaiian Islands. And this may not entirely be an appropriate way to manage these animals. And so there's been research over the last 10 years looking at different approaches to evaluating how these populations are actually structured. And the reason that this matters is that we have a lot of different impacts that can cause problems for these animals. And if you have local populations, they don't necessarily disperse really easily. So you can actually have localized impacts that are really important, and you need to know that. So this is a picture coming up here of research effort associated with this work from 2000 to 2012. There's been some more surveys in 2013 as well. But basically the little gray line is where the boat has gone, and we've collected information about a wide variety of odontocetes over all of those areas. Different methods that we use include just visual observations, but also we do what's called photo identification, where we take pictures of the dolphin's dorsal fins, particularly, and you can see in this picture on the right here, the two bottom right guys, you can see how these dorsal fins have little nicks and things in them that they look different from each other. You can identify individual animals this way and track them over time and see where they go, who they associate with, and keep good track. Sorry about that. We also do biopsies for genetic analysis, do tagging to see where they go in times when we can't see them at night. And some of that tagging we do temperature and depth tagging to see how deep the animals dive and what their diving behavior is. We also use acoustic recorders to collect information about what sounds they're making and what sounds they're hearing. So, could you stop that? So, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about false killer whales. These have been in the news quite a bit in Hawaii because they were listed last year. The insular stock of false killers was listed as endangered. So you've probably heard a lot of talk about them. And you can see in the picture here on the right side of the screen where the stock boundaries are, the gray area that's in close to the islands is where that insular stock lives, and then the larger outer boundary is where the plated stock lives. There's an overlap zone between the two. But basically, in order to figure this out, you say, well, how do you know that there's two different stocks of false killer whales? There's been research ongoing actually with photo identification for a really long time, and over that time, we've basically been able to identify individuals over and over in different places and see who connects with whom. And so this little chart that's sort of in the left upper part shows you what's sort of like a Facebook of false killer whales. So the individuals that are seen with each other have a line connecting them, and if they're seen with each other often, then there's multiple lines connecting them, and it becomes darker. And you can see here that there's animals that are found in this insular area that all connect together in the area where the red circles are. So these ones with the little dark triangles are ones that are found much further offshore, and they haven't been seen with these animals that are in close to the shore. So this is one thing that we said, this is interesting that these animals don't associate with each other, or at least not the ones that we photographed and identified. So then we also did tagging with these animals, and when we tagged animals in the insular area and near the island, we found that they tended to stay very close to the island. So the squares on this bottom left picture indicate 11 animals that were tagged and where they went with satellite tracking. And then the open triangle shows animals that were one animal that was tagged that was in the pelagic area, and it did not go in towards the insular area. Further, we've done additional tagging since those tagging studies, and this next slide here shows some pictures of those maps. So you can see that even over additional time and with more individuals tagged, these insular animals tend to stay really close to the island. So this indicates to us that they do not travel around all that much. The genetics also has borne this out, and looking at genetic relationships between the insular and pelagic animals has indicated that they are distinct enough to be considered separate populations. They don't interbreed together regularly or randomly. Now, one of the reasons that these animals got listed as endangered in the insular stuff is because the trend has been for a decline in the number of animals that have been found in the surveys, which, when statistical analyses are applied, indicated a decline in the population of these animals. So you have a small island-associated population of animals that is on the decline. This graph that's in the middle here, sort of this slide shows that decline. And then the picture in the bottom right is using all of those satellite tracks, we can identify what the hotspots are for these animals. So the insular stock has a tendency to mainly be found here in this northwestern portion of the island of Hawai'i and sort of on the backside of the Maui Nui complex. So this is helpful in looking at things like critical habitat and areas where it would be important to focus on to help keep these animals from going extinct. The next species I'm going to talk about real briefly is rough-toothed dolphin. There's a genetic study that's currently underway to examine rough-toothed dolphin population genetics and relationships. But one of the things that's interesting about rough-toothed dolphins is that despite there being a large number of surveys conducted across the inhabited Hawaiian Islands, it notes here that this is sightings from 2000-2006, but this also beyond 2006, we still haven't seen any rough-toothed dolphins within the Maui Nui complex area. Now, there's probably some around, and they may be out further offshore in places that are deeper water, but it's very interesting to have not seen any, but all the other species, we've seen them around at some point or another in Maui Nui. So this raises the question as to whether or not the animals that are seen off the island of Hawai'i and on the other side of the Maui Nui complex, Oahu, Kauai, Niihau, if those might be separate populations. The photo identification, which I've pulled a chart down on the right side of the bottom right of the slide, does seem to indicate that animals are seen over and over, particularly in this Hawaii Island area. So it supports the idea that Hawaii Island may have a local population of animals which are regularly photographed or seen together in that place. So it'll be interesting to see what the genetics shows about relationships between those animals. The next species I'm going to talk about is the pygmy killer whale. And the pygmy killer whales haven't had as much research done on them, and they are a little bit harder to find. But tagging animals off the island of Hawaii indicated that animals stayed very close to the island of Hawaii. So this may indicate a Hawaii Island population or even an insular stock similar to the false killer whale stock. But of course, we want to look at more than just tagging. So we also did look at a photo identification which we were able to use photos that actually went back to 1985 to look at the relationships, and again found the situation where you have a little Facebook here of Pygmy killer whales, and they tend to be associated with each other over and over in that particular spot. So it raises the question as to whether or not the island of Hawaii may actually have a localized population of Pygmy killer whales. The next species I'm going to talk about is the Pantropolis-spotted dolphin. And this is what I did my PhD research on. So I studied the genetic relationships among Pantropolis-spotted dolphins across the inhabited Hawaiian Islands. And so I put a picture up here of what this kind of looks like when you do these genetic analyses. And so this little colored bars here, what this is an analysis that looks at, you don't tell it ahead of time where the sample is from. I sorted them after the fact. And it basically determines how many populations you likely have, and then how much each individual assigns to a given population based on its DNA structure. So you can see here that mostly the Hawaii ones are green, mostly the Four Islands area, which is Maui Nui, are blue, and most of the Oahu is red, and then Hawaii Niihau kind of assigned both to the Hawaii and Oahu population. So this particular analysis indicated that there were three populations. Hawaii Niihau is interesting because we only had samples from one group off of that area, and we had 8 samples from one group, and the mitochondrial DNA was actually fairly different, but the microsac, which is what this is based on, which is nuclear DNA inherited from both the mother and the father, didn't group out separately from Oahu and Hawaii. So, we don't see them as often out there, and they tend to be further offshore, so it's possible that they're more transient in that area, but probably need to do some more research to look at that. But if these animals were simply interbreeding just randomly across all these islands, you would see 1/3 of the whole thing would be green, 1/3 of the whole thing would be blue, and 1/3 of the whole thing would be red, because they would just be randomly interbreeding, and you would have about an equal chance of being any of these populations. So the fact that there's a tendency for them to lump together indicates that there are some genetic differences that show they don't interbreed randomly, and in fact have some island association. We're also looking at photo identification of these animals, and I put a couple pictures here to show you that they do look fairly distinctive in some cases. Also, I put a little picture here of cookie cutter shark and a picture of dolphin with cookie cutter shark bite. These bites on Pantropolis-spotted dolphins actually heal as little star patterns, so they actually become ways to distinguish animals from each other. And these are really weird little sharks. They just kind of take like a little bite out of the animal. So it looks like they have a hole in their skin. And this is not anthropomorphic at all. This is anthropogenic at all. This is these little sharks, these crazy shark teeth come out. And of course, one of the reasons we were interested in doing this particular research project is because there's potential for interaction with fisheries with the Pantropolis-spotted dolphins. The troll fishery tends to fish over the dolphin schools, and so they have the potential to injure dolphins. You can see here a picture of an animal with a little line injury on it, which may or may not be from that particular fishery, but so whether or not these populations can be impacted by fishing is affected by how big these populations are and where they go and whether they can disperse. The next one I'm going to talk about is Cuvier's beach whales. So beach whales are a little weirder and a little more cryptic. People don't see them as often. These are really deep diving animals, like I mentioned early in the talk. They can go over a mile down. And so here in the upper left is a picture of a dive profile of Cuvier's beach whale, and you can see it goes down to a little more than 1,600 meters, which is pretty far. And these animals tend to go down and hunt for a while, and then they come to the surface and spend some time at the surface, decompressing, and then they dive again and hunt. So there's sort of little times that they spend not diving. They're seen very rarely, so our Facebook of Courbis beach whales is not an excellent one. But interestingly, we have been able to re-site the same animals off the island of Hawaii over, I guess, 1990 to 2009. So they are seen more than once. Also, tagging animals off the island of Hawaii, as you can see in the right side here, indicated, at least in this case, this animal stayed very close to the island of Hawaii and up in that northwestern portion. Blainville beach whales have also been studied off the island of Hawaii, and this one's this depth profile is a little bit easier to see. It's not pushed together as much, so you can see in this picture that the animals, again, that dive down almost 1,600 meters in this case, but then they spend this little period of time at the surface in between. And the reason that this research was really important was that these are animals, beach whales, that tend to be affected by things like Navy sonar and other loud noises. They're the type of animals that will come up dead as a result of that kind of activity. And so the question is, why does that happen? It's not the sound itself is not loud enough to actually directly kill the animal. So something else is going on as a general rule. I mean, the animal would have to be really, really close to the source of the sound for that to happen. So what's interesting about this is that we're finding that because they are basically living on the edge of their physiology, they're diving way down here, and they need this time at the surface to decompress. If these animals are startled at a point where they are at the surface and have not decompressed enough, and they dive where they're deep and they come up too fast, this could potentially be what's causing them to be injured and killed as a result of sound. It's not sound itself. So this is important to understand that in order to try to mitigate the causes of this problem. It's not necessarily how loud the sound is, and there may be other things that we need to do to change how these sounds are produced to help avoid startling these animals into this kind of behavior. Then, then at the bottom left of the screen, you can see a picture of tagging again for this animal. So there were 8 beach whales that were tagged right off the island of Hawaii here that stayed right next to the island of Hawaii, which again, sort of indicates to us there's the potential for a local population there. But then there was also one animal that was tagged that just went way out to sea, and you can see his little black dot just off he went. So it's possible that there are local populations of animals, and then also potentially pelagic populations of animals, and maybe they overlap or share some time together at different points in time. But they may actually constitute different populations of animals, and therefore should be managed that way.
Sarah, can you hold on?
And then,
Just a second? We're still on Blainville's beach whale. Okay, we just moved to melon-headed whale.
okay.
Can you just repeat that slide for us?
I'm sorry, what?
Can you just repeat melon-headed whale for us?
Yeah, I didn't do melon-headed whales yet. That's what I'm doing now. So you were on the right one. I was transferring to the melon-headed whales. Okay, so it's the Blainville beach whales that are the deep diving ones that we were doing the Navy research on. And then melon-headed whales, we looked at the photo identification for them and found that it looks like for the melon-headed whales a little bit different than the other toothed whales. The melon-headed whales seem to have a separate population that's in the northwestern portion of the island of Hawaii, and then one that sort of spreads across all of the island. And you can see that sort of in this Facebook thing here on the left, where this large cluster here is the cluster across the island, but then there's a cluster in the upper left here of animals that are not seen with that main cluster, in groups with that main cluster, and those constitute this group of animals that's found up in the northwestern part of the island of Hawaii. And there's some genetic research that's underway to evaluate this as well, to see if this is really a genetic difference or what's going on there. It's a little different from the other dolphins we've been looking at. Spinner dolphins is the next one here. I think spinner dolphins haven't up yet, so hang in there, I'm almost there. So in the case of spinner dolphins, they did DNA research, which you can see a similar picture to the one that I had for the and tropical spotted dolphins in the bottom left here, but there were a lot more populations that they were looking at as they were going across the Hawai'i chain, much into the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, and not just the inhabited Hawaiian Islands. And you can see the picture that's in the upper left shows you the boundaries that they found, the soft boundaries associated with the genetics. So there's actually separate populations of center dolphins in those different areas. And there's continuing research on photo identification and some work, like I mentioned, going on in the Big Island of Hawaii, Galapagos Bay, and surrounding bays to look at population sizes of some of these different groups of animals. Oh, bottlenose dolphins, I forgot about that. The bottlenose dolphins is part of them. So common bottlenose dolphins, and not to belabor it, same kind of thing. Basically, you see the Facebook there, and then you can see the different boundaries of these stocks associated with the genetics and the photo identification. Then the next one is the short fin pilot whale. And these guys, this picture that's up in the upper left that shows the dive profile. You can actually go on the Cascadia Research website and have that, it'll like draw it out and show you all the things the animals do, and there's a bunch of these up there. So they've looked at how these animals dive and feed, where they move. They've done the Facebook analysis that you can see here in the bottom of the screen. One thing with photo ID that I wanted to include here, as you take more and more photos of animals, if you have if you have a finite population, there's only going to be so many animals, right? So eventually, if it's a small population, you'll have this discovery curve that's in the bottom right here will start to level off. It'll plateau because you'll only have so many animals, and you'll be only adding animals as some become slightly more distinctive, or you have more born into the population. So this helps you figure out how many, sort of the minimum number of animals that might be in that area. There's also a picture here that shows an acoustic tag. I'll talk a little bit more about some of the acoustic work. But similarly, with the short fin pilot whales, there's indications that there's at least island of Hawaii, a population there that's separate from the other populations in the inhabited Hawaiian Islands. So when we look at all that stuff, which is a lot, we basically are looking at the fact that the odontocete that live in the Hawaiian Islands have high flight fidelity and population structure, that they're not just randomly interbreeding and running all over the place. And there's more than one line of evidence to indicate this. We have photo ID, we have genetics, we have tagging, acoustics, some other things. So this is important for us to think about in terms of how we manage these species. There may be local populations that could be highly impacted by localized sources of threat, right? And so it's important that we continue to do long-term research, particularly with the cryptic species and the rare species like these, the beach whales, where it takes 30 years of research to figure out that there's a population in the local area. And then we'll also need to look more at some of the new technologies, like acoustics. And I got a slide from Mark Lammers at Hawaiian Institute of Marine Biology that he's studying odontocete acoustics using, they call them ears, and the map here that's on this picture shows a bunch of stars, and those stars are where these acoustic recorders have been put. So there's a whole bunch of them that are in the main Hawaiian Islands as well as out in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. And they use these to record sounds from odontocete. So, and the nice thing about this is then you're getting information at night, and when the weather's bad, at times when you wouldn't actually be able to be out on the water. And we'll zoom in here on Oahu, and there's several acoustic recorders. And if you look at some of the data from that, you can see that he found that there's slightly higher acoustic activity in the southeast portion of Oahu, which may indicate that that's an area that odontocetes tend to be found more often. Or maybe they just make more noise there, but it gives us a little bit of a sense when you're trying to figure out where, again, like these critical areas are important habitats. This can help us to evaluate that. Now, we're still in the process of trying to learn how to discern between all the different species using acoustics, but some we've gotten some good markers to figure out. And so just show you here a little pie chart that shows from these data that there were 64% of this data were pilot or killer whale, false killer whales is what that is. Pilot whales are false killer whales. 9% rough-toothed dolphins, and then 27% undetermined. But it shows that there's a large proportion of the acoustic activity, at least off of Oahu, is pilot whales and false killer whales. So what does this mean? Well, it means that we need to rethink how we're setting up our stock boundaries and evaluating the abundance of different populations. This still says it's their false killer whale potential listing. They actually got listed. So these data were used to determine that. Looking at spinner dolphin regulations that no one's still considering, swim with regulations and other potential ways to protect spinner dolphins. And if there's small local populations of animals, this becomes even more imperative and important, as well as the contractual side dolphin fishery interactions, beach island navy interactions, and other noises. So we need to think about if animals can't disperse to other areas and they're not roaming randomly all throughout the exclusive economic zone, we have to think about the best practices to avoid negative impact in these populations. And I hope that encourages people to think about their fisheries practices and swimming with dolphins, which I also included a picture here in the bottom right corner of the lady who thought it was a good idea to get in the water with pilot whales and got dragged underwater. Odontocete are also wild animals. I mean, it's nice that it's not common for people to get injured and killed by odontocete, but it's also quite possible to have that happen. And usually it's actually worse for the dolphin than it is for the person. It's more common for people to cause problems for dolphins. But so looking at this as sort of a big picture perspective, because we have these local Hawaiian populations of animals, it sort of asks the question, why does that happen? What's driving that? And one of the things I think may be driving that is actually niche specializations. This is my hypothesis on this, because when you look at the fact that the different species aren't necessarily broken by some geographical barrier, right? Like there's no oceanographic, like no dolphins cross-breed or cross this one spot. It's really different patterns. So probably animals have different niches that they are in, and they have behaviors and things like prey avoidance behaviors, or predator avoidance behaviors, different hunting strategies. They adapt their behavior to a particular area, and they really don't go to another area that much. So they start to not interbreed as much with animals that are in these other areas. But that's something that still needs to be investigated further. It also raises questions about what's going on in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. So far, most of the research up there has focused on spinner dolphins and false killer whales, where they have found some distinct differences among populations in those areas. So understanding better how that works across the whole chain would be really valuable to protecting these animals. And better understanding threats and impacts and how to mitigate them. Because again, if you have small local populations of animals, maybe a certain amount of harassment or a certain amount of take could be more important than we thought it was. So just to finish up, there's definitely things that you can do. I mean, obviously, there's marine biologists out there doing all this research, but there's things that you can do to help protect dolphins and other toothed whales and other things in the environment in Hawaii. Obviously, volunteering your time for organizations. Donations, of course, are always appreciated by most organizations, and I will put in a plug for the Conservation Council for Hawaii, which is sponsoring some of my work to present research at conferences, and has been active in this in the PSA work, as well as the lure.org. And then, of course, Dolphin Smart is an important organization, as well as things like Fish Friendly Business Alliance helps to recognize organizations. And if you use that information, take those recognition programs and let people know about them. Make sure that when you go to see a business, ask them, do you have this recognition? And make sure they know that it's important. And that's valuable to getting people to actually adhere to good wildlife viewing practices. And of course, you taking the effort to be responsible about your marine wildlife viewing is really important. Another way you can help with research actually is contributing photos. So the photo ID work, we can't be out on the water all the time, and sometimes you come across animals and you can take pictures. Cascadia Research Collective accepts photos from contributors, as well as there's an iNaturalist site that Noah has put up to collect pictures, particularly of the large whales. But of course, don't break the law to get a picture. Don't approach animals or harass animals or do things you're not supposed to do. But if you happen to be in the right place at the right time and get a nice photo, it's particularly helpful if you can tell us exactly where you took the photo. If you happen to have a GPS, that's the best. But even if you can say, well, I was 10 miles southwest of Oahu or something, that, it's much more helpful if we know where you took the picture. And of course, the normal practices of things like minimizing pesticides and chemicals, sustainable seafood. Two things I think people don't think about that much are public comments and writing representatives. And there's a lot of actions always going on in Hawaii. And I know it's impossible to read the Federal Register every day, and it's really tough to keep up with some of the actions that are happening. But your public comments are genuinely valuable, and they are considered. And it's important to know what you think about all of this stuff on conservation or other actions that the government's going to take, management. So as you have the opportunity, attending public meetings or submitting public comments really is an important way to contribute to wildlife conservation. And I know the DLNR has a Facebook page, which they put up things like that on. The Hawaiian Islands National Marine Sanctuary, which I was working for, also put things on their website and their Facebook page, and give you an opportunity to tell the people who are managing what you actually think. And they do care about it. Sometimes it feels like nobody's listening, but really that's not true. Having worked for 2 years in that field, we really are paying attention and trying to take those comments and concerns into account. So that's my presentation. I know that's a lot of information in one presentation, but I appreciate you hanging in there. And if you have questions, I can have Lauren facilitate for me.
All right, thank you so much, Sarah. That was really, really interesting. Does anybody have any burning questions that they'd like to ask? I mean, she's really your dolphin expert, so even if it wasn't necessarily about a graph that was up there, even if you just have a good dolphin question. Wow, Sarah, they're speechless. No, but I think it was really good. I think that you touched on some really important conservation topics and points, and saying that in reality, when we're looking at the dolphins out here and we're thinking whether it be bottlenose, again, Chris comes, and I used to be a naturalist here, we come across dolphins quite a bit. And it's interesting, like you're saying, that we're managing them in a way that maybe is not the best way to manage them, for the fact that we are seeing very localized populations. So the population that you see on Lanai or out by La Perouse, those are most likely very localized populations, and that we constantly visiting them or interacting with them could potentially result in negative impacts for these animals. But thank you so much. And I hear your dog, and I know that it's probably 1 o'clock in the morning there. And again, I really, really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're probably really tired, and that was extremely informative. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Good clapping. All right, thank you, Sarah.
All right, have a good night, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll play the other two PSA. So I got a chance to go. My job luckily takes me a lot of different places, and I kind of look at more of those ecosystem impacts, and that's where I come and trying to develop our programs. And I went to this Hawaii Conservation Conference to learn from very specific experts. And I went last month and I met Sarah, and it was really interesting because she was presenting this topic of the people like myself who really identify with those environmental ideals are also, again, the ones who are typically going to jump in and swim with dolphins. I was like, oh, no! So, I will play those PSAs, I know, right?